Hello and welcome to the latest live stream from the nonprofit All Tech is Human. My name is David Ryan Polgar. I'm the founder and director of All Tech is Human. I'm sitting here in Manhattan, where our organization is based, yet we have individuals all throughout the country and globe, as we certainly saw with our latest working group. And that's what we're talking about today. Our latest working group that just released a report on AI and human rights, building a tech future aligned with the public interest. In a little bit, we're going to bring on our special guest for today, Renee Cummings. If you're in the responsible AI, responsible tech, public interest technology space, you're probably very familiar with Renee's pioneering work, really related to thinking about the ramifications of artificial intelligence and better aligning it with the public interest and what that means. We like to say at All Tech is Human, in order to align technology with the public interest, we need to understand what the public wants. That's exactly why we set up our working groups as an open format with individuals from a variety of different disciplines and across the globe. This report, and a big thank you to everyone involved in it, it was made as a collaborative effort led by my colleague Kate at All Tech is Human, with the help of 93 co-authors. So it works a little bit like a Wikipedia type of model where we draw in a lot of content, a lot of individuals, and then really debate some of the underlying issues. What you're going to find in this report, which you can always find the latest updated version of the report if you go to AIHumanRightsReport.com. That's going to send you right over to where the latest version is always going to be uploaded. What we kind of discovered through this working group was that there's 7 key areas of AI and human rights right at this intersection that we're going to go over. But just a little bit about All Tech is Human before we start. If you are unfamiliar with our organization, I'm glad you found this live stream. Welcome. Our nonprofit is committed to co-creating a better tech future that is aligned with the public interest. We have a variety of activities, including the mentorship program, University Ambassadors Program, Responsible Tech Job Board, a community Slack group of over 3,000 members across the globe, and also do regular mixers and summits. I know that's a lot, but we're really taking a holistic 3-prong approach to building this underlying responsible tech ecosystem focused on disrupting the tech pipeline, multidisciplinary education, and multi-stakeholder convenings. I know that's a lot to digest, and that's why we'd love for you to stay in touch. But now let's get the conversation started with Renee Cummings, again, pioneering AI ethicist, also the data activist in residence at the University of Virginia. Renee, welcome to the live stream.
Thank you so much, David, and it's always a pleasure to join you in this extraordinary family we call All Tech is Human.
It certainly does feel like a family, and I feel privileged over the last 2 years to really see how impactful your work has been and how people really come together, again, from a variety of backgrounds across the globe. Because when we think about the future of tech, it's intertwined with the future of democracy and the future of the human condition. That's a big deal, full stop. And that's exactly why we need more Renee Cummings in the world. And that's what we're trying to create here at All Tech is Human with our nonprofit. But one of the things that we wanted to run through with you today, and we're also going to incorporate any of the comments and questions that come in, and then those can just pop in right in our live stream. We also, for today's live stream, have a beautiful background kind of music giving us the classical approach. I think sometimes with these topics, we need a little bit of a soundtrack for it. But Renee, what we're going to walk through is these 7 key areas that we saw with the report. So I just want to kind of lay out all of them, and then we're just going to walk through each one of them and just hear some of your commentary, thoughts on this. In addition, before I get to the 7 parts, I also want to mention some of the key themes that the working group discovered in this process. Some of the themes, as you're very, very familiar with, are around transparency, explainability, user notification and consent, due process and redress, and also privacy. Privacy, a major topic. So the seven uh, areas that we're going to discuss. And again, I want to mention that here at All Tech is Human, we take a bi-directional communication strategy where we don't just want to inform the general public with our reports, but also be informed by that very community and have a flywheel approach where we're constantly improving the understanding that we have. Again, in order to align something with public interest, we need to understand what the public wants, having a lot of inputs for a wide variety of backgrounds. The seven key areas are automated decision making and civil rights. The second one around data privacy. Third, synthetic media and information integrity. Fourth, we have content moderation. Number 5 comes in no particular order. We're not ranking things like a song list. 5 is healthcare. 6, we have surveillance technology, predictive technology, and criminal justice. And 7, cybersecurity and autonomous weapons. I should also note that a lot of these areas are in the news all the time. Each of those key areas is its own specialty in an own area that you could do a deep dive, listen to a podcast, read a book about. One of the things that we try to do at this report is give a broad overview. It's not supposed to be exhaustive, but more providing a larger view of how you can get more involved in some of these issues. Should also mention some of the latest news. Renee, you might have seen in the news, the last day or so, that Microsoft recently changed course with their responsible AI outfit, trying to reduce some of their reliance on facial recognition and facial data, given some of the ramifications of that and some of the concerns that you yourself have raised over the years on this. We also saw Meta potentially changing course around how they target advertising. A few years ago, they got in a lot of trouble around some of their advertising that allowed people to actually target specific groups or also leave out specific groups around housing. But Renee, let's get started with the first one around automated decision making and civil rights, a key area I know you've focused on over the years.
Definitely. Before we drill deep into the topics, let me just say to you, David, and of course to your team, that this has really been a brilliant exercise, because in the realm of data and AI and ethics, we speak about this interdisciplinary approach. And I think this document really crystallizes what an interdisciplinary approach is supposed to feel like. I think we really got so many extraordinary comments and suggestions and approaches. And I think the editing process and just bringing together just those lines that we have shared. I wish that the people who are listening to this conversation had the ability to see how much was actually in the document. And I just want to say, before we go into it, a special thank you, of course, to Kate, to Karina, to Rebecca, and to Andrew, who did yeoman service when it came to this document. I had the easy part, which was just taking a read of what was there. They had the hard part of actually choosing what stays and what goes. So just wanted to say that. So let's start with the first. Go ahead, you can start.
Yeah, let's start with automated decision making and civil rights, especially as I mentioned with Meta, how just a lot of the decisions that happen, especially this even dovetails with how people get jobs or
Definitely
see jobs. Curious about your thoughts with that. Anything
Definitely. I think this was exceptionally done. It really hit upon all the critical, stops that we need to think about when we think about automated decision making or algorithmic decision making or automated reasoning are so critical. And what we're seeing with algorithms, and I think the document speaks to that, is the fact that algorithms have an opportunity to make a decision about you, your life, your opportunity, your access, your visibility, the kinds of resources you have access to in real time. And most times, most people don't even know that an algorithm has made that decision. So when we're thinking about automated decision making, when we're thinking about automated reasoning, we have got to think about due process. Due process is linked to explainability and transparency, and of course, accountability. And the document really speaks to the whole question of civil rights and civil liberties and those freedoms that are so attached now to the automated decision-making process. So I think what the document gets at throughout, and you spoke about particular themes that are in there, but also it speaks to rights and responsibilities and freedoms. And it brings a very value-centric approach to the ways in which we need to think about AI and to think about ethics and to think beyond the legal, to include the social and the ethical as we design, develop, deploy, and adopt. So a critical exploration in that chapter that looks at the intersection of automated decision-making, automated reasoning, civil rights, civil liberties, and of course, human rights.
Very well said. I mean, since you bring up the idea of ethics, that is certainly getting a lot of exposure lately. One of the potential concerns that the working group brought up is to ensure that the ethics is meaningfully done and that it's not a PR exercise and quote unquote ethics washing. Any thoughts that you might have on that?
I think that was also done very well in the document. When I look at how the thinkers behind it were able to really corral all the kinds of frameworks that are out there, the ones that we need to pay attention to. What I also liked was the cross-cultural approach. So not only the Western approach, we had a mix of approaches. And of course, we had the American, we had the European. We focused on different countries across the European Union, what they were doing. Of course, the EU, we know that the GDPR is the greatest tech export coming from the EU. And of course, it touched upon the AI Act. A lot of focus is on that at this moment. So it really gives you the kinds of resources that you need to build the requisite levels of ethical vigilance and to build and to design and to develop and deploy with the kind of ethical resilience that is so important. So it really is, to me, I just love that it's a document that you can press into service in real time.
That's the idea behind it. And then dovetailing with your statement around the EU, which obviously has taken a much more proactive approach compared to the American system right now. We'll see if any of that changes. But when you think of the EU, a lot of us think of, as you mentioned, with GDPR and data privacy. Data privacy is our second theme that we noticed throughout these 7 total themes for AI and human rights. So what are you seeing around data privacy, and where do you think that is going?
Definitely. Data privacy is so critical because it's about protection, it's about security, it is also about autonomy, it is also about agency, and these are all critical to the ways in which we build our identity. So much is linked to data privacy when we think about freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly. These are all critical, and we've got to really think beyond data privacy when we think about protections. And I think the document as well really explores all the facets of data privacy, but also saying that we also need to look at those long-term social impacts, to look at the ethical impact. So we've got to include the legal, the social, the ethical at all times, just not the technical, because a lot of times when people think of data privacy, they're thinking about it in a very technical way. How do we really embolden our systems to treat with privacy? But I like the fact that we take more than a systems approach, and we take an approach that is very symbiotic when we think about all the different things that have got to come into play. So yes, we look at processing and transparency and purpose limitation and data minimization and accuracy and storage and data integrity, confidentiality, and of course, just the general principles around data privacy. But we do a little more than that by saying that, in data privacy, we need to also think about human dignity.
Definitely. Yes. So, I mean, obviously that dovetails with where the laws are, because that's always a debate around Are we trying to get companies to do the right thing, or do we change the kind of baseline of what is even legally possible, especially with any type of data privacy law nationally in the United States in the future? Number three, we have synthetic media. Obviously, a lot of people talking about the potential danger, especially in terms of its political ramifications of any type of quote unquote deep fakes or related to it, cheap fakes. So with synthetic media and the overall information integrity kind of system, we've heard a lot about, is this real life? I always go back to David after dentist, is this real life? That always sticks in my head. Honestly, pretty much every morning I wake up, before I get my cup of coffee, I have to kind of think about that visualization, because a lot of people question whether our very kind of attachment to reality is really being challenged by a lot of advanced technology, especially around the idea of synthetic media. So what do you see in there? And then specifically, synthetic media, it needs to be said, has a lot of potential as a positive artistic endeavor that we've always seen. We've always had kind of synthetic media. If we think about Carrie Fisher in Star Wars, post-death, utilizing her image. We've always done it in commercials over the years. So there's seemingly the artistic part of it. But what are you seeing about the potential negative sides of synthetic media and where this is going?
Sure, and of course we have always got to credit the positive, because technology has an extraordinary potential to do big things in this world, and I think we're doing it now, just having this conversation the way that we're doing it. And we've always got to appreciate that data has the opportunity to really enrich our knowledge base and to enrich the ways in which we think about humanity as well. And I think deep fakes from an entertainment and synthetic media from an entertainment perspective is extraordinary. When I think about it, sometimes I think maybe that's the only way that I would get to perform with Diana Ross on stage, right? If they were supposed to do something like that. But no, it really has. And when we think even in education, the things that we can do with it, even in healthcare, the challenges come when we think about it within a legal scenario, when we think about it within the case of a reputation or someone's identity, and how it creates those extraordinary challenges for democracy. And I know there were approaches to this coming out of Africa, or coming out of places where there are wars and where there are other challenges to human rights and humanitarian crises, and how a deep fake that gets itself into the criminal court could create a lot of challenges. I know the International Criminal Court was also looking at deep fakes as well, and the kinds of implications it could have to the legal system, the ways in which the criminal justice system has to rethink itself. So I think that is very important for us to think about. I think the document, the report, really brings it into perspective and really makes us think about how do we really bring that public interest perspective to synthetic media, because it's something that we're talking about, but we're still not talking about it. So I love it from the entertainment perspective. I love it from an artistic perspective. I love it from a perspective of also working with individuals with disability and looking at things like accessibility and ways in which we could reimagine education and learning and training and development with this technology. But then there are the risks, and we've got to pay attention to those risks, and we've got to do it in a way that is ethical, the way that we disclose, a way that people know what they are seeing and what they are experiencing. But I think once we bring that ethical perspective, which is what the report speaks to, then we could maximize the benefits and, of course, reduce the risks.
Well, it's a major challenge. Obviously, you have a lot of platforms that are thinking, hey, do they need to ban, flat out ban synthetic media? Whereas on the flip side, you're obviously going to see a lot of positive sides. Here's one positive that was mentioned recently with the discussion with Microsoft and some of the changes that they're making. They're talking about, hey, let's imagine I wanted to use my voice and translate it, keeping my voice in Mandarin. I don't speak Mandarin, but a lot of people across the world do. So if I want to do an audiobook, let's say, and I speak in English, now I could use that and then kind of translate that into Mandarin, again, keeping my same voice. That would had really changed a lot of actors across the globe who play like a famous version, right? Like there's always like a Tom Cruise who's going to do this in Mandarin or something like that. But now you could actually get Tom Cruise's voice. So some interesting parts in the pipeline. But now let's get to content moderation. A lot of people are talking about content moderation, the rise of trust and safety, another area we focused on a lot with All Tech is Human. So what are you seeing with content moderation systems that are heavily embedded in how we're thinking about social media and in our digital spaces?
It comes down to democracy. And I think this is the work that we continue to do. It's about democracy. It's really about setting the agenda and who sets the agenda and what's on the agenda and why are we discussing it. It's about manipulation. It's media manipulation. And we've got to be really critical about that. And this is why we need an ethical approach, because a most critical aspect of human rights is democracy. And if there's something that is undermining democracy, then we need to have an understanding of what it is. When it comes to content moderation, I think the response to that is really media literacy and social media literacy and digital media literacy. So people get an understanding of what they are interacting with, what they are engaging with. That is why it is so critical to democracy, because it is our right to participate in the democratic process. And if there is anything that is taking that right away from us, then we need to pay attention to that. So it comes back to the ways in which we are designing these algorithms and the ways in which we are designing algorithms to really enhance the democratic process or to undermine the democratic process. And then it brings to bear that the questions about the different type of actors who would want to manipulate that system. So it is also another great chapter. It also speaks to accountability and transparency and fairness and ethics and voice and participation when it comes to the democratic process. And I think one of the things that we would like to see this family called All Tech is Human, to see that, we use technology to enhance the democratic process. We use technology to bring requisite levels of prosperity, and progress within that kind of democratic space. So I think, again, I can't say it enough. It is really a document that, checks all the boxes when it comes to those questions of democracy, justice, social good, public interest tech, and across the spectrum of accountability, transparency, and explainability as well. So content moderation is really a great case study for transparency and accountability and democracy when it comes to data and AI.
It certainly is. And then if you want to see that document, any of you watching can go to AIHumanRightsReport.com. That'll send you right over to where that report is embedded. We're taking a lot of feedback from today's live stream and then just over the next week to continually improve our document. But around content moderation, Renee, it seems like the larger issue that a lot of us are really thinking about is even just controlling the amount of information online that being in a digital space is so overwhelming that a lot of content moderation systems came about and really have been perfected to effectively try to say, we're giving you what you want as an individual. So there's a little bit of a kind of an existential type of question with it of is an algorithm acting in your interest, or is it acting kind of in a business interest? And that's why a lot of us are advocating to kind of understand the person behind the screen, to understand what is the Wizard of Oz's motivation right behind.
It's so critical because it's about autonomy. It's about agency. It's about self-determination. It's about me having the opportunity to decide what I want to engage with or what I want to explore. And if there is anything coming between me and my individual right to express myself across many identities, then we have a challenge. So content moderation, as I said, it's an extraordinary case study in democracy and agency and autonomy, self-determination, questions of identity, and how do we treat with that in ways which are ethical, because we want to ensure that it's an ethical approach. We want to always ensure that if we are committed to perspective, we are committed to diversity in perspective, we're also committed to freedom expression. That is so critical when we think about democracy and data, and how we are thinking about content moderation or media manipulation or synthetic media, because they all converge in that space. And I think it's really about, when we think about algorithm just in general, it's about, is an algorithm taking away from me that opportunity for me to actually be me? And that's what we've got to think about.
Very well said. And I'm glad you mentioned the convergence too. I know that's something we've been thinking about at our family here at All Tech is Human, that really the kind of responsible AI community and the integrity worker community and the public interest technology community, there are oftentimes these kind of micro communities that might not overlap. What we're oftentimes trying to do is create an umbrella kind of organization and networked approach to learn from each other, because it's very similar in nature. You can't have a social media platform without a powerful algorithm. You think about, platforms like TikTok, and I serve on TikTok's Content Advisory Council, but when you look at the For You page, that is an incredibly powerful tool, and that everybody knows just how important an algorithm is to the experience. And also, if you take the concept of you are what you eat, we are also what we consume. What we read, how we communicate impacts our worldview. And oftentimes, since that is directly influenced by something we don't have kind of permission to understand, that seemingly is bringing up a larger issue. But let's get on to number 5, healthcare. Major concern of the working group of just how AI was utilized in kind of the field of healthcare and where that is potentially going. So Renee, any thoughts on that?
Certainly. I know at healthcare, we have seen the potential and the power of algorithms to really transform healthcare. But we've also seen the power and the potential of algorithms to undermine care for particular groups. We've seen bias, we've seen discrimination, we've seen clinical data sets that are underrepresented when we think about Black and Brown communities. We have seen approaches to healthcare that are not equitable and that are not justice oriented. So I think what this segment looks at is how do we design and develop and deploy and adopt algorithms in healthcare that are ethical, that are respectful, of course, of human rights, and that bring dignity into the healthcare process. So while there are extraordinary things that we can do with AI in healthcare across the healthcare life cycle, we have got to bring that ethical approach to the ways in which we are doing it. Because if we undermine our basic rights, if we use data sets that are biased and discriminatory and plagued with systemic challenges such as systemic racism, then what we risk is the ability to bring decision-making accuracy or precision decision-making to healthcare. Because if it is that we are deploying bias or discriminatory algorithms, then what we are doing is that we are chancing misdiagnosing, underdiagnosing, or not diagnosing communities. And that's what we don't want to do with AI.
This is also seems to be an area where we see great risk, but also great potential. So for example, Definitely. A few years ago, I believe it was through Bing, when Microsoft Bing was still a thing, around the search terms that people were utilizing and whether there was any kind of connection to whether a person might have, pancreatic cancer. And this is something that would have been an earlier detection system than you would have typically through your healthcare system, through your doctor. A lot of people don't see their doctor very often, right? The way that the American healthcare system is set up. So there would seemingly be a lot of potential to this kind of aggregate data that would be far greater than a doctor, a singular kind of doctor could ever have access to. But to your point, how do we also think about the downsides of that, the ability for misdiagnosis, which can be very traumatic in a healthcare system, and then making sure that correlation is not always causation, that we're not making kind of false linkages there. But
and the question about healthcare algorithms also is one about trust.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also about accountability and transparency. And I think we all know that when we think about the black box, we know that the opacity of the black box, the fact that many times the creators of the source code and the algorithms oftentimes don't have a comprehensive understanding on why these algorithms are making a particular decision. And when you translate that now into precision medicine, when you're using an algorithm for that type of accuracy in the medical context, you've got to be concerned about trust. Mm-hmm. And how do we build trust in the healthcare system, particularly among communities that have distrusted or there's mistrust when it comes to healthcare? When we think about Black and Brown communities and the fact that historically in this country, they've been used as experiments. Yes. When it comes to healthcare. You understand why the creation of these algorithms and why public trust and public confidence are so critical, and why we need to take that human rights perspective to the ways in which we are doing healthcare algorithms. Because as I said at the beginning, it always comes back to rights, freedom, and values. And how do we use ethics as a way to design? And how do we use ethics to build the kind of resilience and vigilance that's required in these algorithms to ensure that we are respecting human rights and we are building systems that celebrate, of course, human dignity.
Yes. Well, you seem to also really hit a major distinction that I would argue separates communities within tech. You have certain communities that are more techno-deterministic, that think that technology comes down from the heavens and that we don't need to explain it because it's just magic and you can't question kind of the results of it. Obviously, by my framing, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, as I imagine you are as well. And then even just in our name of our organization, All Tech is Human, is supposed to kind of showcase the importance of us as individuals in our own human agencies, that an algorithm is not falling down from the sky. It's actually embedded through our historical information, our own biases, and our own ability to create something. So the onus is on us as individuals to not treat something as a distant, magical type.
Definitely. And an algorithm is certainly not value neutral. That's something we need to remember. An algorithm is a social construct in as much as it's a computational code.
So we're at our penultimate theme, number 6. We have surveillance tech, predictive technology, and criminal justice. I know when we first met that was certainly an area that I was fascinated by your work, because you mentioned the area of trust. Criminal justice is an area where a significant portion of our population would not always have trust in the system. There's been a lot of debate around how we utilize, algorithms, let's say, in recidivism for how they do any type of prison sentencing. So I'd be curious of what you're seeing on your end, and especially on the part of how it connects with trust.
I think what the document does and does well, it raises questions. It doesn't provide the answers. It makes you question, and that's what's so important. So we've seen when it comes to surveillance technologies, an extraordinary amount of money being invested in these technologies, but they're not reducing crime, they're not reducing violence, and they're really not building resilience in our communities. We've also got to think about the ethics around surveillance technology, the right to know what's being deployed against you, where these technologies are, how you're being tracked, how you're being traced, how you're being terrorized, traumatized, how you're being monitored. Very, very important when we're thinking about surveillance technologies within the ways in which we are now thinking about smart cities, which is
Hmm.
also a very important part of technology. It also speaks to the fact that if we're talking about civil rights and we're talking about civil liberties and we're talking about human rights, we have got to speak about surveillance technologies. We've got to speak about predictive policing. We've got to speak about the deployment of these preemptive policing systems that are based on predictive analytics. And the fact that what we're seeing would be just these technologies being deployed in spaces where we are already over policing communities. And it comes back to trust. And it
Hmm.
comes back to, we know that in many of our cities where we're seeing the highest levels of surveillance, there are challenges between those communities and trust when it comes to trusting the police, when it comes to trusting the criminal justice system, when it comes to trusting the welfare system, the education system. We know in many of our cities, that's where we have our high needs, underserved, minoritized, vulnerable communities, our immigrant communities, our refugee communities. So there are many, many challenges in those communities. And when we attack with surveillance, what we're doing is we're creating an extraordinary amount of trauma in already traumatized, vulnerable spaces. So I think if we are talking about human rights, we've got to look at surveillance through that lens because it's a constitutional question. It
Hmm.
really impacts our constitutional rights when we think about just those many rights that we have when it comes to freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, the ability to develop our identity, the ability to be forgotten. That's a
Hmm.
critical aspect of it. And it brings us back to the EU because in this AI Act, the EU is speaking about banning all predictive policing technologies because not only do they lack transparency, they're not accountable, and they're actually really a very racist approach to the ways in which we think about technology. And, I just want to say something here. Ruha Benjamin, of course,
Hmm.
speaks about technology as a way of thinking. When you're designing a technological system, you're designing a way of thinking. And when we think about predictive policing, what we are seeing is not an approach to reduce crime and violence, but what we're seeing is an old way of thinking. And I always ask when we're doing predictive analytics in policing, predictive policing, data driven policing, evidence based policing, intelligence led policing, what I think about is the history of policing in the United States, a history that is linked to the slave codes. And I ask myself, are we recoding the slave codes when we code predictive policing? And that's something we need to think about from
Yeah.
that human rights perspective.
Certainly something that needs to be kind of our North Star. And then you bring up kind of insinuations of Minority Report. So I guess I call back to Tom Cruise, who was in that sci-fi film a bunch of years ago, and also the earlier kind of book by Philip K. Dick, that idea of predictive technology being used to arrest somebody before they commit a crime, this idea of thought crimes, right? Because in the American legal system, you have to have the kind of convergence of the mens rea and actus reus, the mental state and the act. You don't just have a thought police. That's something that many a dystopian novel has been written about. So lastly, we have the idea and theme of cybersecurity and autonomous weapons top of mind, given the war going on in Ukraine. When we think about autonomous weapons, where do you see that going? And then specifically around what's mentioned in the report.
Definitely. Just a little, just to touch on cybersecurity, which is so critical to everything that we're doing right now, and the fact that we've got to build resilient systems. And I think it brings it back to the duality of technology, the duality of data, the duality of AI, which is it is as powerful as it is vulnerable. And we've always got to think about that. Cybersecurity is one space that we are face to face with the vulnerability of this technology. When it comes to autonomous weapons, uh,
Mhm.
again, just a really crucial aspect. of the ways in which we're thinking about human rights and what we can do with drones and with these swarms of drones that could be mass produced now by individuals. You can create an algorithm that directs the drone, against your neighbor, if that's something that I mean, I hope it's not something that we would want to do, but when we think about autonomous weapons and we think about the power we are placing in the hands of those individuals who have the power to use that, and when we think about the kind of devastation and destruction that can do, it really is one of those places that although it's something that I study from a national security perspective because I have a background in terrorism studies, it's something that I just don't like to think about. The ways in which we can deploy that and the kind of devastation that we can create, things that we cannot reverse, and it really is one of the scary places when we think about technology. And that's why this report is so critical. That's why that human rights perspective is so important. And that's why we have got to bring this ethical approach to the ways in which we are thinking about AI, and why we need to have those critical conversations at the intersection of AI and human rights. And if we are to build something that is aligned with the future, then we have got to come from that public interest perspective. And at the University of Virginia, I co-chair the Public Interest Technology Network with Professor John Goodall. And we've been really trying to include that public interest technology perspective as a value system, as a way of designing and an understanding that we as technicians, as data scientists, as AI ethicists, activists, lawyers, criminologists, we are all custodians of the common good. We are all gatekeepers in this big world of AI and AI ethics. And, this document is really the start of something so big. I think this is just phase one of this document, David. I think you're going to up it in a few months and release part two. I know you.
It's just a start, and Renee, that's why we brought you on here. So very, very well said. A good way to start wrapping up this discussion. But it should certainly be said that when we're talking about AI, we're really talking about community values. That's why I would also incentivize anyone watching that if you're questioning whether you belong in this quote unquote AI conversation or tech conversation, we're really not talking always about AI and tech from a very technical standpoint. It's more about it being intertwined with the future human condition and the future of democracy. Democracy at large, with the rise of authoritarianism across the globe, is in peril. And we're living through a pandemic now that's lasted 2 years. So we seem to be at a crossroads where we're deciding what to do. So that's why I'm thrilled, Renee, to have you on this discussion, and for everyone to check out our AI and human rights, building a tech future aligned with the public interest. You can see that report in the most updated fashion if you go to aihumanrightsreport.com, and then also through our website, alltechishuman.org. You'll see it right there. So Renee Cummings, we want to continue this conversation. As you point out, this is just a start. Where can everyone stay in touch with your incredible work?
Well, they can stay in touch with me at All Tech is Human. That's a great place to always find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter. I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook. And I am, you are able to contact me. Just Google University of Virginia School of Data Science, and I am there. My email is there. A phone number is there for me. Let's keep this conversation going. And I just want to say, we always have got to think about the legal, the social, the ethical, the rights, as well as the risk-based approach. And just if there's any takeaway from this, it's about rights, freedom, values, very critical to ensuring that we build human dignity and human rights into technical systems.
So Renee, here's to human dignity. We need to ensure that everything is centered on that and very human-centered. So Renee Cummings, honored and thrilled to have you on this discussion of our AI and Human Rights Report. That again, you can find out and read it at aihumanrightsreport.com and through our website at All Tech is Human. David Ryan Ploger from All Tech is Human. A big thank you to Kate, Karina, and everyone all of the incredible volunteers through our working group, the graphic design, the team that's also done an amazing job. Lots of ways for everyone to stay in touch with All Tech is Human. We've got a Slack group, mentorship group, job board, you name it, summits and mixers. So Renee Cummings, here's to human dignity and centering that, and here's to talking about human values and building a tech future that's aligned with the public interest. Thank you all, and tell us how you think of the report and what you any feedback you might have as we continue to improve it. Thank you.